Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. Wait as you all file in. Let me invite Jess to pop in, see if she comes down so we can get this conversation rolling. I hope you're all okay. I hope life is treating you well, given the circumstances. Hello, Jess. There we go. I hope things are treating you okay. Welcome, welcome. Hello, Jess.
Hello, hi.
Goodness. Would you? We're not going to go straight into the question and answer
No,
as of
no.
yet. Um, but do you have a light on your face currently?
It's my laptop. Yeah, let me just. Is that okay?
Yeah, you just need to turn it. That's
Oh, let me
fine
just
now.
dim it. Let me just dim
It,
it. Is that okay?
it doesn't need dimming, it needs brightening.
Oh, is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay,
So,
good.
how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Considering everything. Lockdown again.
Lockdown again, yes. But we have to remember that it's happening for a reason. So minor
Yes, no, of course.
inconvenience on our side. The minor inconvenience on our side is met with with better news. Let's just put it that way. The vaccine's apparently coming out soon. So
Yeah, I just got the notification from BBC like 10 minutes ago.
hopefully we're gonna not have to suffer the indignities any longer of
Mm,
lockdown.
hopefully.
Okay, Jess.
Yeah.
I always allow my guests to introduce themselves because I think it's only fair.
Okay.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. So, hi, Eduardo, and everyone who's watching now or will be watching. My name is Jessica, and I am an anthropologist, specifically a social anthropologist, and I have an interest in the anthropology of art, material culture, and museum anthropology. That's something that I've been doing academically and professionally for like maybe 7 years, I think, around 7 years. And
Oh,
yeah, so,
wow.
and yeah, I'll just say that for now, and then we can maybe discuss more about what I do.
Ooh, let's discuss what anthropology is
Yeah, I
because
think
it's
that is
quite.
such a great one.
Go on.
I mean, yeah, I think it's really good that you asked me to do this talk because I think it was around a month ago or so that I put a poll up on my Instagram to ask some of my followers if they knew what anthropology was. And I got a lot of feedback, which was really great, but quite a lot of people said they didn't know what anthropology was. So that's when I kind of decided to share a small highlight with like a snippet of information. And then you saw that, and it's kind of good that we've been able to take this a little bit further, and anthropology is, of course, something that I can talk about. So, generally speaking,
To
anthropology is yeah.
yeah, go on.
So, so generally speaking, anthropology is the study of people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Some people might not consider themselves fully as people. So, for example, people that consider themselves as cyborgs would still be studied by anthropology, and it looks at culture and society and unity and difference. It's quite a broad subject, and can sometimes be considered interdisciplinary. But yeah, it literally looks at what makes us who we are and how we interact with the world around us. Should I go a little bit further? I guess I can
What?
like.
No, no. Yeah,
So,
I was gonna ask you what are the unities and differences that you
so
found so far.
well, that is a very big question. Anthropology is so broad, as I said, and there are four actual types of anthropology. So there is archaeology, which is considered a branch of anthropology, linguistics, and then biological anthropology, which is kind of maybe what some people would think of when they think about anthropology, because it's kind of like Homo sapiens and skulls, and that's what, think Bones, the TV show, that's biological anthropology. But social and cultural anthropology, we look at the way in which politics, religion, all of those things, they diverse. Should I talk about these pictures that you're putting up now?
In a second. In a second.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, culture. Each culture varies, and each society varies, and we look at those differences between exchange, politics, religion, belief, gender, sexuality, and how that is different and the same throughout the world. So many things that is encompassed in anthropology.
And what are the hallmarks that you would associate with having a culture, let's say?
Wow. Okay. It's I think cultural anthropology is more it's more studied in America, but we do focus on that. Would look at beliefs, values, and the way in which society impacts our behavior. So that would be to some extent considered culture with cultural anthropology. Um, so the kind of types of anthropology that I'm interested in are museum anthropology, material culture, and the anthropology of
Mm-hmm.
art. So I can go into what those are and just open up the discussion from there. So material culture kind of looks at literally it's what it is. So the materiality of culture, and it's quite interdisciplinary. And
What is the material?
so anything that is a tangible object that is a marker of a place. So that could be sculpture, textiles, weaving. That's also underneath the anthropology of art. I think there's quite a lot. I've got a lot of books here, but when I suggest anyone who is interested in the anthropology of art to probably look at masquerades, because I think that is what, when I say masquerades, I'm talking about in West Africa. So specifically in Nigeria, there is a lot of material by John Picton, David Pratton, Simon Ottenberg. These are kind of considered OGs in the anthropology world who look at masks beyond the aesthetic value, but looking at how it how they are kind of framed within the particular place in which they're found, and it's really really interesting.
Mm.
But yeah, the kind of objects I look at are in museums, mostly in museums, and yeah, that's where museum anthropology and the anthropology of art are mostly studied. So the museum is a very important site for an anthropologist who would be studying material culture.
Okay. I don't want to dwell too
Like,
long on that.
I've done a lot. Yeah, I feel like I've really explained anthropology now.
You've explained that. Let's go on
Mhm.
to what the image in
Yeah.
next to me means.
Okay, so this is a picture of so I studied my master's. I just kind of go to some context. I studied my master's last year at University College London, and
Mm-hmm.
it was quite an interdisciplinary one. So it was African Studies with Heritage, and I studied there for the year. And I was at UCL. So this picture is taken at UCL in the UCL Anthropology Collection, which can be viewed by anybody. As far as I'm concerned, you can make an appointment to have a look at all of the objects they have. And these are all Igbo, so these are from Nigeria. And these were shown to me and a group of people at the annual Igbo conference last year in 2019.
Mm.
Yeah.
Amazing. So let's move on. You've defined broadly what anthropology is, what
hmm
material culture is, but you
hmm
haven't spoken too much what a museum's purpose is. What's the
Right,
purpose of
yeah.
a museum?
I think the purpose of the museum is definitely changing from what it used to be. So I say what it is, that there are two purposes of the museum now, and well, that museum anthropology focuses specifically on. And one of those is working with source communities. And there is a really amazing book called Museums and Source Communities, which I don't have with me here. But source communities is the name that's given to the peoples or the groups that the objects or artifacts or collections belong to. So what museums are doing now is working quite closely with source communities in many different ways. So for example, I think you'll show the pictures at some point, but what they would do is, let's say there's a particular object in a museum that is sacred or it has significant meaning. People would come from that community to the museum to liaise with dialogue. It's all about having dialogue and allowing people into this particular space. So these objects would be given to the people to use if they need to, and also the exhibitions themselves are no longer influenced by a single curator, but by a team of people, including the people who are from that place, if that's not where the curator's from. So it's about opening dialogue and having multiple voices. It's all about multivocality. And another kind of large aspect of where museum anthropology sees the museum is looking at ways for there to be progression, not just in museums in Europe or, where we are now, but looking at the museum to grow where that person is from. So let's go back to the pieces that we're looking at. If there is a museum in Nigeria, for example, that has Igbo Ukwu bronzes, we would work with that museum as well to see development and progression there, and there's a lot more dialogue and interchange between both places.
Okay,
so time to be reflexive, reflexive, progressive, looking at ways in which the contemporary can inform the past collections they have.
Amazing. So a museum for you is a place of dialogue. It's a place of teamwork, and it's a place of connectivity, and it's a place of diffuse argument. What would you, being a little bit
it needs to be here.
Contrary, that's what it
needs to
please
be. Do so. Yeah, please do so.
Being a bit contrarian, as is my nature, I would like to say the following.
Go for it.
What do you say the state of the museum is currently?
See, this is a really good...
In light of movements like Black Lives Matter, in light of more than just Black Lives Matter, the decolonialized movement in this country, which is more permanent, more pertinent, I would say, to this argument than Black Lives Matter per se.
I'll have to just say this now. Every museum is different. Not every museum is putting in that work, and some are putting in the work and some need to continue to do so. So unfortunately, every museum doesn't operate the same. I can only talk from the frame of ethnographic museums, which ones that contain anthropology collections, and then the ones that I know that I would mention are the ones I know are putting in that work. So for example, to talk about a case here and to talk about a case abroad, I would definitely recommend the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam, in Holland. They have been putting in the work, and I can explain a couple of examples as to why they have done that. So a lot of their collections and a lot of the exhibitions focus on the colonial histories of Holland and beyond. So they look at Indonesia, looking at Suriname, and looking at local communities that are, in the locality. So there's been an exhibition that's been there for quite a long time that looks at slave histories in Suriname. And if you walk into that room, all of the names of people involved are written on a wall, and it's really, really interesting. So, and they try to, also Melanesia, they try to bring those histories back, and it's about not being one-sided, but actually speaking about this from you know, a more objective truth and looking at the past. It's about looking and confronting where we've gone wrong in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they've done that really well. Um, I also think the Horniman Museum, I mean, slightly biased, I did used to work there at some point, but I think that they are also doing really well because you have to involve the local communities. I don't know if you've seen their recent World Gallery there. It's been there for like
I've
two
been
years
to
or so.
Honium, and
In the last
it's
2 years?
one that I was quite in the last few years. It's one that I
Okay,
was
yeah, so you've
quite
seen the new exhibition.
how can I put it? I, I was quite taken aback by it because I didn't expect
Okay.
this kind of local museum to have such a wealth of a collection in artifacts, like, you know, the African masks they had, beyond that the accoutrement and all the rest of the stuff that they have which pertains to visual culture. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these museums, they have a long legacy. So it comes from the founder, and they've just continued to collect. But I think if you go there now, you can see that they've split the gallery up into regions, and they kind of try to delve into an aspect of the culture from that region, and they tell that story so well. And then at the very back wall, they have a whole section that explains anthropology, and they have used local groups, so local, I think, postdocs at the RAI and some of the community groups with disabilities to put their work in the cabinet. They also have kind of looked at themes in unity and diversity. So they look at things like colors, and when we look at certain colors, what do we think in different cultures? Like, what does the color red mean? So it's about looking at ways to kind of show the objects in new ways, and I think that they do that really well. But let's talk about specifically Black Lives Matter and how certain museums are looking at centenaries. So I think
Yeah.
in the last few years, there are museums. I mean, I can only talk about the ones that I work with, and those would be the ones that I'd be considering to be progressive. I think a really good, if you skip maybe to the pictures, I think a really good one to talk about would be the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge,
Which
which,
picture does that look like? Is it this one here?
no. It's
That one?
no, skip those.
That one?
No, that's for the
Let me
Chopin
see.
Museum, actually. I think you showed them in
Okay.
the beginning.
1 second. Let me see. Is it that?
Yeah, no.
That was UCL. No,
So
is it this?
it's yeah, that's the blog, and then I've got, if you show some of the pictures of the objects, right, and I can just kind of talk about that.
Let's talk about
So
that. Yeah.
I first went to this museum a couple of years ago, and they had an exhibition for the centenary of the partition of India in 1947. So this was 2017, and this particular exhibition
Mm-hmm.
was called Another India. So it looks at another side of you know, British history in India that we wouldn't really necessarily be so familiar with. So it looked at indigenous marginalized groups within India. So from that perspective alone, it was trying to tell a different story. And a big part of anthropology, I mean, the curator was an anthropologist, but a big part of anthropology is to speak for marginalized groups when you can. So that's quite that's something that we do try and
Season
focus
4.
on.
Let's go in. Let's go in.
So, not only did
So,
this exhibition look at something different, but they've commissioned contemporary artists to put
mhm.
their work in the museum. So people could kind of see kind of the trajectory of today, and so that the local community could also be involved in the exhibition process. And that's something that a lot of museums will be doing now because of the Windrush, and because I think it's also the centenary of Nigerian independence. So we'll be seeing quite a lot of exhibitions in the next couple of years, because I know obviously coronavirus has halted quite a few projects, but in the next year or two, we will be seeing a lot of exhibitions that focus on independence and focus on the narrative of people of African descent in the UK and the relationship between colonialism. So I think it's quite prominent, and it's already kind of it's the ball is already rolling, if you see what I mean. And I think we will see
Okay.
that done in a tasteful way, hopefully.
Let's talk about a little statement that you just brought out there.
Okay.
Speaking for.
Uh-huh.
Can a museum really speak for a community, or does it have to speak with the community? And I really ask you this question in light of sort of arguments that go along the subalternist tradition.
Yeah, right, Spivak. Okay, so when I say that the museum speaks for, what I mean is they're just a vessel. They need to be the space. They need to utilize their space to enable people to use it, and they need to enable their space to be used to create dialogue. Nothing can be closed. Nothing should be closed in the museum.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, the space should enable people to come in and have that dialogue and to show kind of what things mean to them. Because I think you can't have an exhibition, well, an ethnographic exhibition, let's just say, in a world museum or culture museum or anthropological museum, and not have the right engagement and involvement from source communities. Not anymore, anyway.
Okay. So you mentioned source communities on and off base. So are these source communities within the vicinity of the museum, or are they source communities from the area where these objects have come from?
It can be both, but most of the time it would be from the object site, the from the locality where the object is found. Because let's say, for example, the area where the object is found might be where that particular community is still utilizing that particular object to this day, and that might be where oral traditions may be passed down, so that the museum might be able to learn something else about not just the provenance but about that particular object. But of course, museums can also work with local groups, and they do try and do that. So there's different ways in which they do that. I think, for example, the picture you've got there is from the stores at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge. And there is a project that's ongoing now. There is a website called re-entanglements project. And that is where this whole do you know about that?
No, I don't. I'm just laughing because you mentioned entanglements, but that's an anthropological fact also.
It's not that type. But yeah, so that project is a big ongoing project, which will be an exhibition soon, I think next year. And it looks at one of the first anthropologists, Northcote Thomas, who went to Nigeria in 1909, and he purchased or gathered quite a lot of objects, artifacts from Nigeria and a couple from Sierra Leone, and brought them back to the museum. And now, 100 years later, they're being brought up again. And so what you can see there is some of the conservation students at UCL. They were working on those objects to kind of conserve them back for the exhibition. But interestingly, this is such a big project. So they're actually working with contemporary artists to kind of respond to the exhibition as well. So Kalani Abbas had an exhibition in 2019 at the National Museum in Nigeria, and he utilized. So I'm sure you're familiar with his art style, and so it's really interesting. Sometimes it's like a composed like a collage, or often using found materials. And so in this one, he had used some of the photographs, because most of the archive in this is photographs, and so he used the photographs to create his own artwork. And quite a lot of contemporary artists are using the archive to create their own artwork in response to this. And so that's kind of where we're going with things, and that's how you can involve the source communities. But also they have worked with local communities in South London as well. So ways that museums can work with communities here in the UK and then also abroad.
Amazing. So bringing things forward again to the question of sort of provenance. How does anthropology deal with provenance as a thing? Because it's something that's also carried over into art history, and it's usually carried over into the provenance of buying. As in, if I explain a little bit about provenance.
Yeah, go for it, please.
Provenance is something, or is a concept regarding ownership and who has owned an object, and how that object has come down to us or is received in a certain way. So how does anthropology deal with that? And does it also deal with the other sort of, how can I put it, the other markers of value. So provenance, what's the other ones? I can't remember anymore. But anyway, go.
So most of the objects that will be used in an anthropology museum would be in store, and they do have collections assistants and they do have really good archives. A lot of museums are trying to digitalize their archive if they haven't done that before. And what they would try and do is to kind of have really detailed index cards and use those to have that material. Sometimes there are objects that they just don't know where they're from, or they're not entirely sure of the region, and they do try and they'll try and figure it out. But essentially, the objects can be acquired in multiple ways. It could be purchased, it could be gifted and given, it could be looted. But when there are kind of discrepancies, or we're not really sure, or it's to some extent unethical, it is best practice to state that. So, for example, I will go back to the Women Museum because this is a really big topic right now with the Benin bronzes. I know, as you know, that Dan Hicks has just released his book, The Brutish Museum. So the Benin bronzes, we all know well. They are. If you don't know, I will explain that they were pillaged in the end of the 1890s in Benin City, in Nigeria, and they are on display at many world museums in the West. But in the Horniman Museum, they're on display, and it does state exactly how they got there, that they were looted, and that they are not going to be on display for a very long time. So it does state that in 2021, or beforehand, when the Benin Dialogue Group, so this is a descendants of the Oba in Benin, they are going to discuss with the museum how to repatriate these objects. So repatriation is something that can come about when provenance is considered quote unquote shady.
Okay.
Yeah. You have the Benin
Let's
bronzes there.
discuss the big one in the room, the big elephant, as I like to call it. Imperialism and colonialism. Many people say that anthropology is a handmaiden of imperialism and colonialism. The whole idea of anthropology was based on knowing your, how can I put it, knowing your local. That's where SOAS comes in and other institutions like it. And just in general, how has, in the past, anthropology treated imperialism and colonialism, or has been associated with it, and how has it moved away? You've discussed it in a fair amount of detail, but it'll be also interesting to find out how they've also moved away from imperialism and what the current stances are.
Yeah, I mean, anthropology you can't say that it's considered, it entirely was the handmaiden of colonialism. And I mean, there are quotes that say, you know, people came with the Bible on one hand and the anthropologists in the other, and that's essentially how many countries were subjugated certain places. Anthropologists, in some places, were spies for empire. They went and they did participant observation, which is that's the discipline's method of field work. So anthropologists would go somewhere, would live with a particular community or stay with a community for a very long time, and then they would write a book. And oftentimes those books could have been written to, you know, subdue a particular community. So it has that legacy, and that legacy won't ever go away. But, you know, anthropology has moved on with the times. So I would say from around the 60s on, we had different movements. So structural functional type of anthropology, which kind of looked at society, and then we moved on to, I think I would say the 70s was a really big turning point, because feminist anthropology came to the forefront, and also it was a time of I think in the decolonial era, anthropology had to shift. We can't just, anthropologists couldn't just do what they pleased in a place that no longer was of, connected to empire in that way. So I think that caused a shift, and then we kind of moved on to a postmodern anthropology. And now I think that anthropology's changed because anthropology used to be considered the study of the other, somebody else, and it was very Eurocentric. But now it's more understood that anybody, first of all, can be an anthropologist. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an old white man, for example. And secondly, the study of anthropology has also changed. So in the decolonial era, anthropologists at Oxford and at other institutions decided to look towards Mediterranean anthropology and other areas, because it was really looking at places that were, related to the empire. But now anthropology can be conducted anywhere, and so we have this new phrase that we call native anthropology. And so that would be, for example, me studying my own society and my own culture. And we've also moved on to become a lot more reflexive. And I think there are other types of anthropology now. That earlier I mentioned the 4 types: linguistic, archaeological, biological, and social. But now I think visual anthropology and what I would call cyborg anthropology, they have really kind of come into their own in this era of globalization, and this interconnectedness has kind of made them, which word, Shannon? Oh, I'll wait for Shannon to. Oh, native anthropology. So you would be considered a native anthropologist if I was to study Jamaica, which I have actually in my bachelor's. And so I think
Amazing.
that globalization has really led to a rise in visual anthropology, cyborg anthropology, and public anthropology. And so public anthropology is taking anthropology from the academic sphere and adding it to other kind of professions. And then cyborg anthropology looks at the connections. For example, what we're doing now, the use of social media. It looks at how that has changed us. And the other one, visual anthropology. So that looks at film and photography. And these are, these are ways in which we use anthropology to become less didactic and maybe more to some extent progressive, and less we kind of taking it away from that colonial legacy because it's open to everybody. Yeah.
Okay. So going off on the back of that, anthropology has had to change and adapt because it has had to change and adapt.
Actually, yes.
But at the same time, what are the statistics, or you must know as an anthropologist, how does the field look? Let's just put it that way, in terms of.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna be honest, of course.
Stale,
Yeah,
male,
I'll
and
keep it
pale.
100.
How does the field look in terms of stale, male, and pale? Because in terms of who the scientists are, who the anthropologists are, looking at prodding and representing those museums at the high end, it takes a fair bit of time for how can I put it? It takes a fair bit of time for people to kind of switch route.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question, because just because aspects in the discipline have changed, it doesn't mean people take to them. I'm just kind of explaining the general route of where anthropology is now, but I can tell you for a fact that not everybody feels that way. Not everyone has gone through the movements. Some people would just stick to a functionalist view of anthropology, or some people would stick only to, a postmodernist view of anthropology. And so it's not that everybody suddenly kind of decided, what, we're in 2020, I'm going to have these thoughts, because we still unfortunately have anthropologists that subscribe to eugenics, that subscribe to, unfortunate opinions of others, that, that perpetuate these negative tropes. But I also think the discipline is changing. And if you want, I can talk about the pictures that are up here. If you go back to the one of, I can talk about how I'm using it in my practice. Yeah, the one before that. Yeah. So, I co-curated an exhibition last month, I think about 6 weeks ago, with Kanaiza. Digital. She's a digital curator and has a gallery online, just at kanaiza.kanaiza. So um, that was also with Ancestral Futures for Shumba Masai's EP, Top Code 2, that is streaming. Yes, Shannon, we're going to get to you in a minute. And that's streaming now, so on all platforms. Now, this particular object came from the collector. So we had an African art collector called Alfonso Mendy. I can send the information later. He is a West African collector, and he brought a lot of objects that he had for us to use in this exhibition. What was really exciting about this particular exhibition is the free reign that I had as an anthropologist to kind of choose what I wanted. And when I saw this particular artifact, this is from Sierra Leone, Mende people, and when I saw this, it's used in a ritual in a women's coming of age initiation ceremony. And when I saw that, I like immediately thought about Shannon. So you can skip to the next picture and I'll explain like Shannon why like my anthropological brain was ticking. So obviously Shannon's from Sierra Leone. Oh well, half from
Explain who
Sierra Leone.
Shannon is.
She's just watching right now. Okay, let me plug you. Yeah, sorry. Shannon Bono is an artist, a arts educator, a curator, a facilitator
Maybe
that
I should
has.
get her on at some
Yeah,
point.
okay, we can bring her in. Let's bring her in if we can do that. Let's bring you in,
We
Shannon. Come
can't.
and talk.
It's only a
Can we not bring
two-way
her in?
conversation.
Oh,
We
okay.
can't bring her in. It's only two-way.
Well, Shannon, you could
Next
type if
time.
you want, but I'm going to explain like why like my anthropological brain was ticking. Um, so if you so yeah, the Mende head that can be seen in many ethnographic museums. Particularly, Shannon saw it at the Pitts Rivers in Oxford, and okay, sorry, she saw it at the Pitts Rivers in Oxford, and that kind of prompted her creative process as a contemporary artist, looking into her historical roots. And you can see what she's curated, which is a canvas, and then she actually cast. If only like Shannon could explain this herself, but she casted her own head. So skip to the next one, and you can see she's like made her. Yeah, no, almost. Yeah, that's her own head that she's made as a cast to replicate that. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's definitely something that ex-curators and anthropologists should definitely be looking at how contemporary artists look to the past and through their own mediums to create something that is new but also enables that dialogue to come in. I think that's a good way that we can continue to have ethnographic objects, artifacts relevant and in museums, but also allow people who are from those places to speak through their own work. And that's something that I've been kind of really interested in the last few years. So I would definitely say that, well, my master's thesis looks specifically at this. Not in, you can skip her picture now, not in this particular concept, but in the concept of looking at Nigerian contemporary art. So it's really fascinating the Nigerian contemporary art scene. And look, yeah, you can leave it there and I'll talk about this later. And I was looking at how contemporary art speaks to the past. So just how Shannon used her art to look at, kind of reflect on an artifact. I was really interested in how aspects of the past are used by contemporary artists to kind of convey really powerful messages. So let's, for example, you can think of Lebain Hamid, Nkishone Bare, artists who use, like cloth. That's a very big kind of indicator of colonialism, and or looking at that and using that in a contemporary setting. So that's something that I focused on, and that's that kind of intersection there of contemporary art playing to the past or using, the past at the same time. I think that's a really progressive and interesting place for anthropologists to situate themselves, or anthropologists that work in, in museum spaces or as curators.
Amazing. So I want to ask you the following question. Why, as
Right.
anthropologists, must you show and educate others? Why is there
Mm-hmm.
specifically within your discipline a dent towards explaining the past and showing it to others, rather than just having an object without any sort of context.
Yeah,
Why must
anthropology is,
we relate to what I'm saying?
we look at connections and we look at society. We can't just look, I think, specifically purely aesthetically. And we try to, okay, I'll talk about this exhibition actually, is a good example. So this is an exhibition that I co-curated last year, 2018, or end of 2018 into 2019. Oh, I didn't know this was a wine thing, Eduardo. I would have had some wine. I'm pretty sure
No,
you got
this is
green tea.
water,
Oh, okay.
my dear.
Um, an exhibition at the Lady David Gallery at SOAS actually. And so I'm using the objects from the SOAS teaching collection to create an exhibition on belief and ritual in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of didactic, it's in a cabinet, it has labels. The previous exhibition that I'd done with the objects from the Alfonso Mendy collection and using Shannon's work had no labels, and it had there was no case. So I wanted to break down that barrier, and that's why I put the Ben Bones replica there, because I wanted to break down the barrier of what a typical museum looks like. So there was no cases. You could almost touch the work, and you could read about it in your own time, because I'm really interested in seeing how people interpret things. And I think anthropology wants to enable people to interpret what they see, but it also wants to inform, because there is a really vast world out there, and I think it's important for people to see who we cohabit this world with, and understand how different cultures and different societies, how they interact with the world. I think it's fascinating to know that. So that's why it's purely not aesthetic. Yeah.
Amazing. So now we can have a more wide discussion. I think we've exhausted what anthropology is and let's talk about yourself and how anthropology relates to you as an individual.
Yeah, of course. I guess why I was interested in anthropology, maybe?
Yeah, what brought you towards anthropology?
Okay, so I think I've always grown up in from very diverse traditions. So my background is, it's Jamaican and Zimbabwean, so it's already two very different cultures. That's always interested me. And then I've grown up in an area of East London with a very large Bangladeshi community, and a kind of large.
Hamlets.
Sorry?
You're from Tower Hamlets.
Yes, I am. I'm from Bethnal Green. We have a very large Bangladeshi community and a growing Somali population. And then I also I went to a Jewish school, and then I went to a very Christian school. So I've always been, wouldn't say not necessarily straddling, but being aware of differences. And I've always been so curious about it. So I kind of was just so interested in how different people live their lives, different practices, beliefs, and that kind of led me to anthropology. And I've always wanted to discover more. So I think that's primarily where my interest lied, because I knew there was so much, in the world out there. So that's kind of what led me to anthropology specifically. And then what led me to the museum, I guess, this was a very long time ago. How long? I think more than 15 years ago, I used to go to the British Museum with my mother, and I was always so curious.
British Museum?
Yeah, this is where it all started, actually. So I go to the British Museum, and I was always so curious why Africa was positioned where it was. I was just curious as to how the objects got there, who put them on display, sorry?
Apart from Egypt, Africa's in the basement apart from Egypt.
Yeah, if you explain that. Yeah, and I was interested in why was Africa kind of just maybe not just Egypt, but why Egypt was, at the forefront. And I just wanted to know how it got there, who was curating, what did they look like, and I had always had so many questions. So I decided that was something that I wanted to kind of be a part of, and I wanted to do that. And then I quickly, kind of realized what that entailed. And I think I really had to did some amazing work with the Royal Anthropological Institute. They had a conference 2 years ago called Art, Materiality and Representation that was chaired at the British Museum and also with SOAS, and it was like an amazing 3 day conference that kind of looked at how anthropology and the museums intersect, and that was again really, really great.
Okay. Tell me more about how anthropology and museums really intersect.
So, I mean, okay, let's talk about this. There is a term called salvage ethnography, which is exactly what you think it is. During the 1890s up until about the 1930s, that's a time where anthropologists, I don't know, they just thought that certain cultures and traditions were dying out. So they took and bought and purchased objects and artifacts from all over the world and they sent them to museums. So a lot of the objects that are in museums, it comes from that tradition of anthropology.
Salvaging.
So, sorry, the collecting.
Mm.
So a lot of the collections came and they formed a part of the early discipline because a lot of the textbooks that anthropologists write, so those are called ethnographies, they look at a particular society or a place, but they always have to go back to the objects which we use and how we interact with them. So it could be something so simple as maybe like a boat or fishing items or maybe objects that we might use to modify ourselves. Those are so integral to the way in which people live their lives. And so those objects often find their way to museums. So there's been that relationship between how things get there and how anthropologists write, and they always talk about
Wrong
those
thing.
connections.
Connection's getting funny. There we are.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I've literally just lost my train of thought there. But yeah, the connection between anthropology and museums. And then again, like I said, there are museums that have anthropologists that work there. Wild museums, pretty much Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, the Pitts Rivers, the British Museum, anthropologists work there. Anthropologists work at so many museums, the Horniman Museum, and so there's that connection between the curators as anthropologists and anthropologists
Okay.
as the curator.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about how anthropology has also been used as a way of salvaging lost cultural knowledge.
Yeah, okay.
For example, in the sense that, you know, there's been a clamour or a movement towards using objects like hair picks
Mm-hmm.
and using more traditional forms of those objects.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way you salvage the object, you're also salvaging the culture or the cultural aspect behind it. For example,
So, I mean, anthropologists, yeah.
I had a teacher once tell me that, oh, don't bring in your modern concerns of black hair into the historical narrative.
Right.
Do you understand what I mean? She said that I was bringing on the significance of hair currently into a historical context where it didn't belong.
Interesting.
And this was in relation to Olidano Equiano.
Okay.
Because I found that his profession in the UK was he was a hairdresser. And to anyone with African roots or anyone with sort of Afro-Caribbean roots, that would be an obvious red flag because it means that he's keeping up with something that was culturally his inheritance and carrying it on in a new culture. So even when people who should know better sometimes don't know better about how our societies kind of function.
Well, I think first of all, when an anthropologist works as a curator, you have to realize that the curator is essentially, you know, they're a voice, but they're not the voice. So you have to always be open to interpretations from other perspectives. So I think that, you know, you can't think that what you're saying is the sole answer. So that's why you have to try and, you know, work from different perspectives. Sorry, could you go back to the question as well? The very first question you asked, because I did want to answer that one.
So how are anthropologists now using...
Okay.
You remember?
So you were talking about salvage ethnography. So, yeah, salvage ethnography is essentially is a thing of the past. We don't really that doesn't happen anymore, that we collect things on the belief that something is dying out, or in the belief that, you know, we
It's
have
going
to
extinct, like a language is going
preserve
extinct.
it. No, no, we wouldn't really collect with that opinion now, but that's kind of, as I would mention it, that's the reason why a lot of objects and artifacts are in museums today, because of that tradition. And I definitely think that, you know, each museum is different, each curator is different, but what is quite important is to try and use the collections that are in store and what is in display to symbiotically create dialogue, or kind of be in line with what is current in society today. So to kind of dismiss present narratives, it's wrong, because you would have, you know, we don't live in the past. We have to talk about the way in which the past and the present and, you know, potential futures kind of intersect.
Intersect. That's what I
Yeah.
was trying to say.
So that's what it. Yeah, that's entirely what we do, and we do try to do. Yeah.
Okay. In the last 10 minutes of this,
Oh my gosh, that's gone so quickly.
I always extend it just in case someone wants to have more of a conversation with us.
I mean, yeah, I'm also totally up to people in the comments asking questions. Oh, okay. I think maybe it's my headphones. Let me just take them off.
Okay, hello. Is that
Can you
better?
hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear us both now? Is that good? Is there more of an echo anymore? Because I usually spot the echo. If not,
a little bit.
Okay. Well, we're going to do the following thing. Oh, that's better now. Great. So it wasn't from me. I just want to ask you the following. What books, kind of capping off this kind of section on anthropology, what books are you currently reading? And what books would you recommend for anyone?
I would actually recommend Museums and Source Communities, which I don't have with me. And I would recommend, let me just check the title so I'll be correct here. The Art of Being a World Culture Museum by Barbara Plankensteiner. And also, if you're just interested in African, this is a good one, but there are so many books. And the kind of art that's in this book, this is kind of what anthropologists would be studying in museums. I've got so many notes in there. I just opened up on a really amazing Ashanti store. And there's actually, at the exhibition in the Chopin Museum, they had this against a contemporary version, and that was very interesting because it was like made from like orange plastic, and they kind of spoke about like, why is it there, what do we think about it. So they had a whole kind of exhibition on cultural really, really, really interesting. And so many textbooks. Anything by Joy Hendry is good. So this is A Beginner's Guide to Anthropology. I mean, because I really like Thomas Highland Edison. So this is a history of anthropology. So you can show, if people are kind of interested in the theory and the kind of movement within anthropology and where it got to where we are now, this is a good one. I have many anthropology books. I don't have to talk about all of them, but this has been really amazing during my master's, Perspectives of Africa, because a lot of the topics in here I've circled kind of go anthropology. So that's it for the kind of books. And what I'm currently reading
We can
now,
save the other ones for later.
Oh, okay.
For your current reading, because that's the anthropology section.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just say, we've enjoyed and we're going to love and leave anthropology. And if you guys stay with us whilst we have a quick 5-minute break, we'll be back at 7.
Yeah, and then I can talk about what I am, where I'm working, what my role
And then we
is.
can talk about all of the rest of it for another 30 minutes at least.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
see you guys in around
Bye.
5 minutes.